Okay, on this last video of the kind of welfare economics that we're talking about, we're going to start from this idea of the equilibrium and it being the optimal point, do a kind of quick overview of why being out of equilibrium is not a good thing, and then characterize what the losses are. Okay, this is basically introducing briefly and in a very superficial way the idea of the deadweight loss. This is a fairly technical economics term. I think it's important that you be exposed to it, but really the more important thing is we're just characterizing the losses from not being in equilibrium. So again, we've asserted, and I showed you through the last two videos how when you're at the equilibrium, Q star, P star, where supply equals demand, where market's clear, where marginal benefit equals marginal cost, all different ways of saying the same thing. We've maximized the sum of the consumer surplus, the area below demand, above the price, and the producer surplus, the area above the supply and below the price. We've maximized that sum. So we went through the example of when we're at a point to the left of the equilibrium, a quantity to the left of the equilibrium quantity, we determined that because marginal benefit was greater than marginal cost, there would be gains from increasing our production and consumption, because the additional benefits generated by consuming another unit more than outweighed the additional resources needed to produce that. So we also said that really the rule was as long as marginal benefit was greater than marginal cost, you increase your production and consumption, and then you stop where marginal benefit equals marginal cost, because there are no more gains to be generated. So if we're at Q1, how do we characterize the losses to society? Well, we characterize them by comparing them directly at the point where we want to be, which is at that equilibrium. So what we're doing is we say, okay, we're at Q1. What are the losses that are being generated in a broader way? Well, we're kind of looking at we're measuring those losses by comparing it to the best point. And so what we're going to do is when we look at this triangle, it's a triangle bounded by the equilibrium and the quantity we're at, and also bounded by the marginal benefit, or the demand curve, and the marginal cost, or supply curve. So this triangle here represents all the losses that were, or the kind of lost benefits in a certain way that we're experiencing by being at Q1. So this area right here is called a deadweight loss. And it's the loss from not being at the equilibrium. It's a misallocation of resources. And again, it sounds weird because you're thinking, well, marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. How is that a bad thing? Well, you look at it as kind of a lost opportunity. If you produce and consume more, you'll improve the net well-being of society. So that's what you want to do. And then you stop where there's no more gains to be had. Okay? So that's one example of the deadweight loss. It's that triangle between the quantity that's below the equilibrium quantity, bounded by the supply and demand curve. We also have, we look at the quantity where the quantity was greater than the equilibrium. Okay? So again, we talked about the situation in general where marginal cost is greater than marginal benefit. We determined that the best thing to do is to reduce our consumption. As we reduce our consumption unit by unit, the savings from not expending money on resources outweighs the loss from a reduction in consumption. Okay? So that's something a little harder to wrap your head around, but we're just saying, in general, we'd be better off. We're kind of wasting money by consuming more. Yes, consuming more, people feel better, but we have to take into account kind of socially the resources going into that. And the resources going into it are not covering the benefits. So what we have here is another deadweight loss, because we're saying we're comparing our situation at Q2 with the best possible place, that equilibrium quantity, and we're saying we're looking at the savings, the lost savings, that difference between the marginal cost and marginal benefit. And if we go all the way back, we could say that this area is another representation of deadweight loss. And again, the term is not important. What's more important is this idea that being at Q2, we've essentially foregone all these benefits. And really the best place we can be is at that equilibrium. Okay? So, roughly speaking, what we've done in this series of videos is gone beyond simply using supply and demand to say how much should be produced and what's the price. We're also characterizing the benefits to society. Society is made up of consumers and producers. So we're able to characterize the benefits generated to society at that equilibrium. So one last thing, we've used this particular graph of supply and demand, and it kind of implies, if you look at this, wow, there's a lot of benefit to consumers, a lot of benefit to society. But when we start looking at situations where we have a less elastic, kind of a flatter supply and demand, we could have a supply and demand curve like this, right? Flatter, and so you have much smaller producer and consumer surpluses. So that's just a bit of an aside. But the key thing is, we've got this term of deadweight loss. What's most important is to kind of keep in mind what it represents in terms of the losses we're incurring from not operating at the